Good evening, everyone. We're so excited to continue our discussions with you about issues we are facing in Florida when it comes to our water quality, wildlife, and health. We feel it's essential to continue having these conversations and getting feedback. We believe that when communities are empowered with knowledge, resources, and ways to come together, we can make positive changes. I want to start off this general discussion tonight by getting some introductions. I'm Stell Bailey. I'm from Cocoa, Florida. I grew up here on Florida's Space Coast. I lived in Cape Canaveral, Cocoa Beach. We were movers as a family. I work as a co-facilitator of the National PFAS Contamination Coalition. I'm also the executive director of Fight for Zero. I'd like to introduce you to Jennifer and Victoria. Jennifer, tell viewers a little bit about yourself.
Hi, thank you for giving us a voice tonight to educate others in our community. I was born and raised in 32937, the Space Coast area of Florida. And I had a wonderful childhood, did not move at all in my childhood. And I went through the public school system. And once I graduated from high school, I found out the year and a half later that I was diagnosed with a rare form of bone cancer back in 1991.
Wow. Well, we're going to get into that a little bit more. Victoria?
Hi, I'm Victoria Hicks. I was diagnosed in 2017 with stage 3 breast cancer. I was raised in 32940, but went to Satellite High School because Vieira High School was not quite yet a thing yet. I'm not going to tell you my age. But I was the first in my family to ever be diagnosed with breast cancer. My diagnosis was estrogen progesterone negative, but HER2 positive, which means it was not any part of my hormones that caused my cancer. It was simply environmental. And I was actually with another girlfriend of mine, diagnosis early in her 30s as well. And 4 months before my own diagnosis, I was with her when she passed of breast cancer.
Wow. Okay. So we're going to be talking about your stories tonight. They're so incredible. We're going to go to Carrie. Hi, Carrie. Welcome to the live stream. Can you hear us? We're getting a little bit of feedback. Do you have a microphone? I'm just getting static. Oh, wait. Now it's gone when I take your... Say something? Just a little bit better. But it did work. It fixed the static that was in the background.
Okay. It says I'm unmuted and my mic is working.
Yeah, I can hear you a little bit, but there's some kind of static there. You gotta love technology.
Sorry, guys.
It's okay. No, don't feel bad. Do you want to try to leave and then click back in?
Yeah.
Maybe? Yeah, try that. Yeah, were you guys hearing feedback on your end? Okay. So we'll just wait for her to pop back in. And so tonight, I just want everyone that's joining us on this live to know that this conversation is going to be an ongoing conversation. It is, there is so many things that we could cover that would take us hours upon hours to go over when it comes to this situation in Brevard County and the contamination issues. And so we just want to cover a few things tonight, but I just want to assure you that this is not going to be the last of our conversations on this. And I want to talk about a little bit of the history on cancer clusters and pollution here in Brevard County. I do want to start off before we get into Satellite Beach, because I think we're going to be primarily focusing on Satellite Beach, Patrick Air Force Base, and the surrounding area. I want to make it clear that a lot of people think that this is just a Satellite Beach issue when it comes to contamination and the health issues, and that is not the case. So if you live in Brevard County and you are thinking to yourself that this is just a Satellite Beach issue, you could very well be affected too. These chemicals that were found at Patrick Air Force Base were found in Palm Bay's drinking water and Titusville's drinking water. So don't think that just because you don't live in the particular surrounding area that you're not affected. So I want to talk about how did we get involved in these issues to begin with when it comes to Satellite Beach, and how we learned about these issues, and a little bit of the history, like the 90s cluster. And I know Jennifer Jackson's going to have a lot to be able to bring forward in that conversation, because you were basically a part of that 90s cluster.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Obviously, you can imagine, back in that time, it was an anomaly really to hear of someone at 19 getting diagnosed with cancer. So it was really a shock to our local small town beach community. And, back then we didn't have social media. So to get a diagnosis like that, when it was determined in the local area, the immediate thing that was said to me is, you need to get out of the area. You are young to have this cancer. You need to go where the experts are. And that's how I wound up at University of Florida at Shands. And what was fascinating to me, of course, my family was just focused on me. Quite frankly, the doctor said I was getting a degree to save my life. But what I learned while I was up there during cancer treatment was that already doctors in Florida were questioning what was going on in our area, because they were seeing an unusually higher incidence of people coming down with diagnoses, more so than what they commonly saw. And of course, at that time, since I was just focused on my treatment, I was really not aware how much was coming out in the Florida Today newspapers while I was in treatment about the town hall meetings, families coming together concerned because there were multiple diagnoses in the Patrick Shores area right outside of Patrick Air Force Base. And there was a lot of people questioning. But unfortunately, at that time, because we don't have the power of social media, we were dismissed. It was considered an unfortunate event, probably an unfortunate virus is what they determined caused it. But of course, what we know today, thanks to what we've gained in grassroots efforts through social media, that we now are aware that this isn't just a local problem. This is actually a national problem that we're seeing pop up in the news every week throughout the nation, at different military installations.
Yeah. So just to give everybody a little bit of history that aren't aware of what happened in the 90s, it was reported 30 cases of Hodgkin's lymphoma. That was what was mainly covered in the news. They didn't cover other cancers like the cancer you had.
Correct.
And so I'd really like to talk a little bit more about those Hodgkin's lymphoma cancer cluster. There was only expected to be like 2 out of 100,000 cases. And there were nearly 30 within a few block radius, right directly next to Patrick Air Force Base. And I know when we began our research, I'm going to be very forward right now. I'm not from Satellite Beach. I don't live in Satellite Beach. A lot of people have that misconception because I was so heavily involved in this case. But the reason why it really struck me was because my family also went through something so similar to a lot of the families in Satellite Beach. I knew that this was bigger than Satellite Beach issue, but I also had Hodgkin's lymphoma alongside my brother. And when I saw that there was a Hodgkin's lymphoma cancer cluster, I felt like that was God calling for me to that this whole work, period, whether it's in Satellite Beach, in Brevard County, helping the West Coast, helping Central Florida, this became my calling. And so that 90s cancer cluster, reading those historical documents and learning about basically how the Department of Defense swept it under the rug. If we're going to be forward about it, it seems like they definitely swept it under the rug. And so one of the things that gets frustrating for some people in the 90s is that they didn't include the other cancers. So what kind of cancer did you have, Jennifer? And were there other people that had your same cancer? And how many people did you know have in the 90s?
Well, I think what's fascinating is, my cancer is under 1% of all cancers within the bone cancer family. So, when I looked at, 30 years later from the experimental procedure that I signed my life away to save my life to do at a teaching hospital at Shands, what fascinated me was the fact that not much had changed in that journey. And what I did know at that time and continue to know today is that what I had was not a genetic based cancer. It's not common for other family members to get the cancer I had. So what we know is now today they state over about 90% of cancers have an environmental trigger component to them. Yes, we can have predisposition, we could have a genetic component, as we well know, especially we hear more about the breast cancers and the genetic component. But we know that if we, attribute our lifestyle choices, that we can have an impact on those genetic switches turning on and off. And the environmental impact in our area puts all of us more at risk if we tend to be more susceptible or predisposed than, let's say, an area that didn't have the environmental contamination we have. So my concern as a 31-year survivor is that we knew back in 91 that there was a concern and doctors were looking at our area. And we knew from Erin Brockovich coming in 2018, and we know from now what we're hearing in Washington and the Department of Defense acknowledging the Superfund site and cleanup of the 32937 area and Patrick Shores, that this is not something that's going to go away. We know PFAS is a persistent chemical, and actually when the Superfund initiative was created, the reason why we didn't see much movement and outside of talking about it was because it was more complicated than they realized when they started recognizing what it was going to take to clean up what we call forever chemicals now. So, what I find a lot today is people look at me as a story of hope because I survived my cancer, but obviously I talk a lot with families and offer support to families that wind up losing a loved one to cancer and lose the battle. And, what I try to empower people with is, what can we focus and control? And one of the things a lot of people talk about in our area is, okay, I can't control that this water issue is here, the PFAS risk. So we talk a lot about water filters, educating people about the things they can't control and do, their nutrition habits, their lifestyle habits. So again, I think what's important as we talk with the other stories tonight is, we're here as messengers to share with people, yes, we are survivors, but we can't stop speaking and advocating to want to see the change we want to see in our world to prevent cancer in the future, because this problem is getting worse. It's not improving until we start looking at how we can take responsibility in corporations and clean up, the government and clean up, and start looking at ways we can be accountable for saying the next generation, we don't want to have them have, right now, the increase of cancer hospitals we talked about before I came on. Back in the 70s and 80s, we didn't have children's hospitals at the number we do today, let alone cancer hospitals. We've got to look at that and think, why is that?
Yeah, I'm putting up a picture right now in Brevard County. You will see these billboards everywhere. And in this particular picture that I snapped, this billboard says "Fighting Cancer Together," and there's a billboard directly behind it, extremely close, and they're advertising the same exact thing, "Fighting Cancer Together." It is plastered all over Brevard County, and I've noticed a great deal of cancer centers popping up in our county and across the United States. I want to bring up also a newspaper. This is an archived newspaper, an old newspaper, and it talks about 20 dumps at Patrick Air Force Base and Cape Canaveral. That's another contaminated site. The Patrick sites range from a 60-acre landfill to one no bigger than a desktop. Air Force reports show, and I just want to mention, those reports are not easily accessible by the general public. Those reports show that in some areas at Patrick, metal and hazardous chemicals have been found in underground water at levels hundreds, even thousands of times higher than state standards. Some of the most worrisome sites include a fire training area. If you didn't know, perfluorinated compounds, also known as PFAS, or a forever chemical, comes from AFFF, which is a firefighting foam. next to some of the most worrisome sites include a firefight training area. This is an archived newspaper. To the Banana River that was used from 1963 to 1985 to burn petroleum byproducts, about 6,000 gallons of petroleum, over 20,000 square feet of the shallow aquifer at the site. There are numerous archived newspapers that discuss contamination. And now, since the 90s and the 90s clusters and all of these concerns came forward, there was a Restoration Advisory Board, also known as the RAB, formed on Patrick Air Force Base to openly discuss these contaminated only on base. They will only discuss contamination on base. There's an invisible line around base, and those contaminants do not come off the base. So they will only talk about the active installations, which are NASA, Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, and Patrick Air Force Base. So back in years ago, one of the ways that we began our research is we started pulling archived newspapers. And we started uncovering a great deal. And that's why media is so important to be reporting and doing investigative reporting, because to find out all this information, and then we were able to continue just digging and digging and digging. I want to bring up the PFAS, the Department of Defense report that came out in March 2018. Patrick Air Force Base tested over 4 million parts per trillion. To give you guys an idea of how serious and big that is, the EPA's safety limit is 70 parts per trillion. Just 70. They found over 4 million parts per trillion in the groundwater.
Well, and stuff. You know, when we were at that last RAB meeting, I mean, we've discussed this. It really struck me that we had those gentlemen speak before it, and they were discussing about known contamination back from 1991, and that they were proudly speaking on behalf today that it had officially been cleaned up in 2020. So for 30 years, they knew contamination in that location existed, but it took 30 years to clean it up. So in the meantime, what other lives are being impacted? You know, as that's continuing to sit where it did until it cleaned up. And what really struck me when those gentlemen spoke is one of them said, I was there in 91 and I've seen this all the way through my career until 2020. But they were talking about their pride in cleaning up something over 30 years ago that they knew, but there was no discussion about the concern of public health and the impact on public health. And I found that very concerning. And this was just at the last RAB meeting.
Yeah, those meetings are interesting to say the least. And I think we could probably do an entire session on those meetings alone, and going over all of the documentation of contamination since the 90s. And I think that should be one of the lives that we do in the near future. I want to talk about our first ever meeting for Satellite Beach. You know, I met Dr. Greenwalt, and she was a really amazing advocate for the community. As an oncologist, it is very rare that you see a doctor speak out. And she was not only affected, but she lost her best friend, and she had all of the Satellite High School graduates that she knew that were diagnosed with cancer, and she knew something wasn't right. And she is a hero in my eyes, and she's the one in the pink in this picture. And we are just forever grateful for everything that she has done, and using her voice and being able to spearhead this just amazing community that we've built, and trying to fight this injustice that's happened to the people within the community. And this is the first meeting that we went to, and we had a discussion with the community about what was going on, and she did a presentation. And so I want to go to Victoria. I want to ask you, what were your thoughts when that first happened? Like when you were first told that you weren't the only one, and there were other graduates in your class. Did you think it was odd?
I think when you first are diagnosed, you're in your own little bubble of what in the world and how did this happen? Especially when knowing that when you look at a doctor and you're sitting there saying, it's none of my genetic components that caused this. So what caused this? And they look at you like they don't know. And then it goes from that to, well, my friend Kelly just died of breast cancer at 30. And then another friend I heard had it. And then that seemed strange. And then I was wrapping up the end of radiation, heading into reconstruction when Dr. Greenwald reached out to me. And she kind of put some missing pieces together for me as to just how many of us satellite high school graduates have actually had cancer, and then the staggering number of those of us who had breast cancer. And it went from seeming that's a coincidence to this is no coincidence. There's something here. And all of the, I mean, no, I did not live in Satellite Beach. However, once you go to Satellite High School, you meet all of your Satellite High School friends, and you pretty much live there. And you do hear along the way all the backstories of the contaminants and all of the people saying, oh, there was a cancer cluster, just all those things. And as I was putting the pieces together, and as I kept talking to Dr. Greenwald and kept hearing these numbers, it all just kind of came together. And I think on that clip you just showed, the article I had stated, that it became very, very clear that it was not coincidental, and that it was something that needed to be looked into more, and that thanks to you, Stell, they kind of met a generation that wasn't gonna let it sit anymore.
Yeah, and I think we were so lucky in our generation too, because we have the technology.
Social media is actually in our favor now.
Yeah. And so I think that really helped us. And when you guys started sharing your stories, it brought hundreds, not a couple, hundreds, nearly 800 and something cases in our database from 32937.
I remember one of my jobs in that was starting to go through everybody who put their information in, and they reported to us their cancers. And I remember one of the jobs that you had assigned to me was to go through and make sure that, okay, you were diagnosed in this year, so you are going to go and make sure you're in that decade. And so I was just whichever decade, in case you didn't choose the right decade. And just the numbers were staggering. And then, of course, as I got to 90s, 2000s, and then 2010 to 20, like now, the names that I would recognize, the ages of all of us, and the numbers would just goosebumps. The hair on my neck would stand up, because of, there's no coincidence. There was no, oh, wow, like that's weird. Like it's disgusting. And as a mom, all I could think about was my baby lives here. My child is here. And that's definitely something that I know pushes you forward too, and all of us forward, that no more.
It's our future generations. And I mean, I feel like if we don't stand up, who's going to? And, you know, the original 90s, the survivors, there were many that didn't make it in that Hodgkin's cluster, but they tried to stand up. They even tried to take it to court in Tallahassee, and they weren't successful, but they left a legacy. They left information, and information was so powerful in what they did. If they didn't stand up, I really feel like we wouldn't be as far as we are today. Right. So I really want to recognize all of those original 90s and their families, because some of them are passed away, and their families stood up and met with me one-on-one in their homes. I'll mention one, Joshua Woods, Jennifer Jackson. I think you said you went to school with him. I will never forget, because I spent 3 weeks going door to door knocking, doing my research and investigation. And his mom was so it moved me to tears because she was so welcoming. She said, "Come on in. I want to show you some pictures." And so I sat in her living room with her as she went through and showed me images of Joshua Woods. And all I could see was like, oh my gosh, this is like my little brother at the age of 21 being diagnosed with the same exact cancer. And going door to door and learning of each person's story, and then being like, my neighbor has breast cancer, my neighbor across the street has this cancer, my brother had cancer, my mom had cancer, I was just diagnosed with cancer. When you say, Victoria, it brings you chills, it's bringing me chills as I speak about it today, because the more and more I got involved in it, the more and more I knew I can't stop. I cannot stop, because this is not a coincidence. Something is going on here, and this is not normal, and it's been normalized almost. So,
Stel, when you started collecting data for the heat map, do you have a picture of that? Because I feel like the visual of that is powerful as we started recognizing and people started self-reporting that there were neighborhoods, even sometimes out, where as people moved in and out, I'm thinking of that one story where they said the people that moved out of the same house had the same cancer diagnosis and didn't know the person before them had that diagnosis of cancer.
Really, you still try to say something? No, it's still not working. No.
I want to talk.
I know, you need to. Do you have a microphone or headphones?
It's just on the laptop.
Oh,
It doesn't all the way up. You can hear me or not at all.
just a little bit. I know that Carrie was at one of our first meetings, and I remember her sitting there, and she's actually been affected in multiple ways by contamination. And I'd really love to hear your story, but for some reason your computer's giving us this I don't know, a static. Is that how you would explain it? Like I can somewhat hear your voice. If you have headphones, maybe plug those in. But so I do want to talk more about, I mean, we discovered a lot. Like I said, we could do a lot of lives, but I'm going to bring up this newspaper clip where they basically blamed the 90s cancer cluster in South Patrick Shores on a virus, basically, is what they did. State experts suspect a rare cancer cluster more likely was caused by a virus than military toxins, as residents feared.
Well, we know better today, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
we do.
Honestly, I think you might have said it earlier, Victoria. I was just happy that I survived my cancer. I wanted to get my life back at 20, 21, go back to college, put it behind me, move on with my life. So, I didn't per se follow up more than just always. I remember when the book Civil Action came out, I devoured that book because I was, whenever I heard of something that sounded like something that could be an answer to what occurred to me in our area, I would definitely notice it in the media and read about it, or wonder, wow, I wonder if that's what could have happened to me. And when I look back to moving back and then meeting you ladies and meeting Carrie and so many more people, like Victoria mentioned, when we started collecting the data, I felt like people were coming at me like, oh, Jennifer, you should hear about this person, or you need to go talk to so-and-so, or do you remember so-and-so? And it sometimes got overwhelming because it was frightening to me to think, have I been sitting on my laurels while I was a survivor when we could have been collecting this data and gathering it all these years since I was diagnosed with cancer in the 90s? And, I even remember questioning the RAB committee when they decided to create the RAB committee of Patrick Air Force Base in 1994, because I thought it was very interesting that it came to be after the 91 Florida Today cluster mentionings. And then I remember also going to meeting and asking, hey, if you need someone to go back to all that data, I'll be happy to be your girl and look into it. And they're like, oh, well, we've only documented it since 94 forward. And I was like, well, gee, isn't that convenient? So, we've learned from the Rebecca Jones incident of the pandemic and what occurred there. The Department of Health is an agency that's run by the government. And we know that the government has the EPA. We know that the government has, the Superfund initiatives. It all sounds great on paper. But once we know these contaminants exist and they're impacting public health, just talking about it isn't enough when people continually are diagnosed, and not everybody surviving like those of us that are here to speak. There are people like the Josh Woods and so many other people that, sadly lost their lives too soon, especially when we know if the proper thing was to do, we know about this, let's not cover it up, let's clean it up, that more lives could have been prevented from ever hearing the words, I have cancer or thyroid conditions or other autoimmune conditions that we know have come out of what we're learning about chemical contamination in the environment.
And that's what's so sad about this whole thing is it could have been prevented, all of the future diagnoses and loss of life. Like we always talk about, our mission is to save lives, because had they not have been exposed, they would have had a better opportunity with their health. And it's really sad. And that's why we're at a point where we're like, it's time to hold the Department of Defense accountable. I want to ask you guys, what was it like when you first found out you had cancer? Like, how did you find out you had cancer? Who wants to start? Like, what
Stella, I think you should share that, or Victoria.
Do you want me to start how I found out? I had just had my daughter, and I had a lymph node swollen in my neck and in my armpit. And I was having extreme night sweats, and I couldn't breathe properly as I was walking upstairs. Come to find out, I had a 13-centimeter tumor in my chest. And I knew something was wrong because my brother had just been diagnosed, and I was getting similar symptoms. And I kept telling the doctors, it took me 6 doctors to get my diagnosis. And I kept telling them, my brother was just diagnosed with cancer. I have the same symptoms as him. And they said, there's no possible way that you have the same cancer as him. There's just no possible way. And sure enough, I had Hodgkin's lymphoma, the same exact cancer as my brother. It's pretty crazy, but that's how I found out. And I guess it didn't hit me that something was really wrong until my dad got cancer too. So it went from my uncle, who's not blood related and lived with us, got cancer, then my little brother, then myself, and then my dad. And it was like boom, 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 boom. We had to learn to be caregivers and patients in the same year. And so I knew then, I'm like, something, and our family had that conversation over and over. We were like, this isn't normal. Something's not right. And we were asked all the time, where did you guys grow up? Where did you guys grow up? Jennifer, how did you find out?
Well, I was at college, and I wanted to teach cardio dance aerobics. So they explained I needed to get a physical before I could take the instructor certification course. So they had just opened up the concept of walk-up clinics. So when I came home for the holiday break, I told my mom, hey, I just need to run down to one of these walk-in clinics and quickly get a, physical. So that way I can say, yep, and then go back to school and take the certification and do cardio dance aerobics. Well, obviously, when I went for that exam, they felt my leg, and she said, this doesn't feel right. Is it bothering you? And at that time, I was working out at the gym. I was running. I was bike riding, walking a lot, very physically active, and I did not have any pain. So I said, not bothering me. I just thought it was maybe a little water on the knee. Well, she just did a plain x-ray, and when she walked in to the examining room, she looked like she was going to pass out. And I looked at her and I said, what's wrong with me? And she said, have you ever heard of Teddy Kennedy Jr.? And all I said is, all I know is he does not have a leg. And that began the journey of her putting us in touch with the sports medicine doctor in Melbourne at the area, Dr. Bryant, who then, when he saw my case, immediately said, because back then you didn't have internet, you had FedExes, and it was during the Christmas break. So all the doctors had gone on vacation. And so there were FedExes being sent to Moffat. And, it was all a blur after that, because I had to contact Georgia Tech, withdraw from school. Like I said, the doctor said, you're now getting a degree to save your life. It was just I had an infusion port put in 10 days later, getting chemo, losing my hair. It was a snowball from them because we were in a race to save my life because I had a high grade component in my marrow by the time we found it. And the scare was that it was going to potentially metastasize to my lungs. So, I thank God that I went for that physical because I didn't have any pain. And most people with my cancer have severe pain is what brings them to the doctor. And had I not done that, I probably would not be alive to tell my story today.
Wow. Victoria, how did you find out?
I actually was really random. I came home from work exhausted. But like Jennifer, I was very active. I was a runner, worked out all the time. So I just figured, single mom, working out, working. I was just tired. And I came home and my phone on my nightstand lit up because I laid down in bed and I picked it up, looked to see who it was, put it back down, just let my arm fall. And where I felt it, I felt a mass. And I figured I had a doctor's appointment already scheduled for myself about a week and a half later. So I thought, I'll ask him when I see him. And it had actually fluctuated in size from that time. And he was not worried about it. He said that without a family history, I was 33 years old. He wasn't worried about it. And he's like, call me if it gets bigger. 8 months later, true to HER2 positive breast cancers, they're very fast growing and aggressive cancers. And it grew to an 8 centimeter mass. And I thought, well, that ain't right. And so I called and I was like, hey, you called and said, call if it gets bigger. So here I am. And he called me on a mammogram and an ultrasound. And the lady who I was talking with when I was doing the mammogram, we were joking around and laughing, and she took the photo and she became very serious. And I thought, well, that's not good. And then they immediately put me in an ultrasound. And she's like, oh, you said that grew fast, did you? And I was just kind of like, yeah. And then they put me in a room with 2 chairs and a box of tissues. And I thought, well, the writing's on the wall. And the lady came in looking at my chart and looked up at me and was just like, sighed and said, oh, hi, honey. And she told me that it didn't look good. And I asked, is it like not good like cancer? And she wasn't allowed to say anything. And she just kind of looked at me like, and I was like, okay, now it's big. And she said, yes, it is. And I said, am I going to die? And she's like, we need to figure out what kind it is first, if it's cancer. I was like, I saw what you did there. And I just remember grabbing the wheel of my car and just telling myself, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay over and over. And then just a biopsy. And then after I had the biopsy, there was lymph node involvement because it woke the beast. And I was stage 3 breast. And like you, like I blinked, I had a port in my chest. And then every 3 weeks for a year of chemo, double mastectomy and reconstruction. And you're just in that days of cancer. But I think my son was definitely the first thing that you think of when you ask, oh, am I going to die? I have a child. But here I am. May will be my next tumor marker check. I do every 3 weeks, or every 6 months. And I'll be 3 years out if everything's okay.
Oh my goodness. It's just like people need to hear these stories. Carrie.
Because it's not just like, hi, we're here. Everything's well.
Exactly.
I remember sitting on my kitchen floor talking to you one night, Stell, because I think the year after you're done, because when you're in cancer, you are in fight or flight.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have time to process. You just wake up every morning and you're like, what am I going to do today that I don't want to do?
Mm-hmm.
And you do it to save your life. And then you have that year later. And I remember like bawling my eyes out to you, just saying, I'm processing now. Like I'm finally processing this.
Yep.
And then you process like not just what you went through and the surgeries you went through and
yep.
But like, oh, my child shaved my head on my birthday because my hair was coming out. And my child found me on the stairs because I could no longer walk. And that happened while I was going upstairs. And my baby, like my 5-year-old, my 6-year-old, like those are things that that you don't think of when you see me with hair sitting here and I'm fine, you know, right now. And I think it's that part that really probably drives us the most of the journey.
I call it the aftermath. And
Yes.
I talk to people all the time, and I tell them it's normal, it's okay to feel this way, because there's an aftermath. And once everything settles down, the gravity of what you went through finally hits you. And life is so different. You view things so differently after that. And it is more difficult, in my opinion, in the aftermath than it is while you're fighting. Because, like you said, you're so busy fighting and just trying to live and save your life. And I think these stories are so important for people to listen to and realize how people are being affected at young ages. These diagnoses are being done from teenage year all the way into people's 30s. This isn't like a whole retirement community. Like, we have so many misconceptions of what's going on here. These are young adults that have a whole life ahead of them. And once you're diagnosed with cancer, it's a lifelong journey, because you're always going to worry about that secondary cancer. You're always going to be worried about when that scan comes back. And sometimes there's those lifelong effects of going through chemotherapy or radiation, or, you know, your body goes through a lot. You know, the chemotherapy I went through, it didn't just attack my good cells or my bad cells, the bad, you know, stuff. It went after the good stuff. And so, you know, some people get thyroid issues, and some people, I have neuropathy on my whole entire left region. It is something that is unexplainable unless you've been through it. I want to see. Let's Carrie, can we hear you? Let's see if we can hear you. Say something.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Oh my
Can you hear me now?
God! It's so exciting.
Hey guys.
Carrie.
I switched.
Oh.
I switched over to the iPad instead of the computer.
Oh my goodness. So I'm so glad you guys are all on here tonight. Carrie, you have such an amazing story too, and I would really love to hear it. I met Carrie at one of our meetings. She showed up and she was like, oh my gosh, I went from one contaminated community and now I live in another one. And you were just like, this is unbelievable. Like, you know, yeah. So tell us a little bit more about, you know, your what you've been through, and, you know, how you learned about Satellite Beach, and just, you know, start there, I guess.
Okay. I'm so glad you guys can hear me finally.
Me too.
Everything that you were saying, I'm like shaking my head. Yes, yes, yes. And so, yeah, I met you guys all that day back in 2018 at the town hall meeting. And like you guys were saying, we're so blessed to have social media, because it totally gives awareness. It connects us all. And I just lived on that same road as the meeting. And I literally just came down the road and I was there and I met you guys. And I was just like, I had no idea that any of this was going on. And I had gotten environmentally sick up north where I'm from a fire and toxic mold. And my family and I all got sick. And we saw cancer. We saw so many things, chronic illnesses that we're still living in that aftermath, like you were talking about. And so I became very cold intolerant. And so that's what led me to Florida. And I felt so much better in the warm and by the beach and the salt air and everything. And I landed in Satellite Beach, of all places. And because I had learned about cancer being, you know, 90% environmental, and we can totally control some things. Yes, we can't control everything, but we can control our water filters. We can control our nutrition. We can control so many things, what we put on our bodies, the ingredients that we use for our body products, like everything down to, there's so many things we can control. And so I had already made all of those changes. So when I moved to Satellite Beach without knowing in 2016, I installed a reverse osmosis water filter. I I was eating organic. I was doing everything that I could to decrease my body's toxic burden and my family's toxic burden. And I didn't learn until 2 years later. And we had a water sprinkler at the house that we were renting. And my dog, who also got sick with us in our apartment, she went into liver failure. She had masses in her lungs. She would lay out in that grass every day after the water sprinklers would go on, and that wasn't filtered. I had no idea that it was contaminated with PFAS. And so basically, fast forward 2 years later, we're doing all these things trying to get better and from our environmental illness, and not realizing we're living in a contaminated area. And so I met you guys at the meeting, and I just immediately wanted to get involved because I had just grown a passion for health and wellness and things that we can do to help ourselves and everyone around us. And so basically, I was just like, whoa, what is going on? Like, first of all, and then I was like, okay, what can we do? And I'm so glad to be able to be here tonight because I've actually made the hard decision to move out of the area. So I'm not living in 32937 anymore. I lived there for 5 years, and unfortunately, my family members and I ended up growing masses and getting a pre-multiple myeloma cancer diagnosis, and a lot of things that our bodies were already overburdened and already had a lot of years of exposure to toxins. And so we had to make the hard decision to move out of there because we don't want to have another cancer diagnosis. We don't want to have worsening of our autoimmunity problems and things that have already happened. So, but over here where I'm at, I have learned, like you guys were talking about, it's a national problem. It is blaringly obvious because just on the river, there is a 3M factory that has been dumping, and they allowed it for 5 years. The government allowed it. So, and a lot of people, I don't believe in the area, know about it. We live north, up farther from the river, but just finding out about it is just, it's so obvious how it's such a huge problem all over the entire country. And it can just affect so many parts of our body. And I also want to add that I developed a passion for using food as medicine and nutrition, because that's one thing that can really impact our bodies in a really positive way, and how they handle the toxins that we are exposed to. And we actually, I worked in pet nutrition, and I would get customers coming in, multiple customers coming in, that their dogs got the same cancer as them in the house. And our question would be, where do you live? And they would say, Satellite Beach. And we would help as much as we could, and we would get their dogs on the best nutrition that they can and try and help them with detoxing too. But it's just so obvious that the area is not only impacting the humans, but pets, the manatees, everything that's come up recently. So many, every single being in the area is being impacted in a negative way because of what happened.
I want to bring up, because a lot of people aren't really like involved like we are, really like in the information, and so they're trying to catch up sometimes. So we have the perfluorinated compound issue, PFAS contamination, but South Patrick Shores, which borders up to the Air Force, and we're going to do a completely different stream on that with some people that live in actual South Patrick Shores. They're dealing with another issue on top of PFAS contamination. And I'm going to show a couple pictures here. We learned during our investigation while knocking on doors that these homes were built on top of a military landfill, an old military landfill. And so some of the items that we documented as we knocked on doors was burnt silverware and rounds from military rounds, tons of glass. There was photo paper that we had discovered. And we also had metal detecting done and dug up some of this stuff. Lots of rounds and even practice mortars. So I just wanted to bring that up. We will be having that conversation in the near future, but South Patrick Shores has that issue on top of what's going on with the PFAS contamination. And so definitely keep an eye on that. We have all of our information on our Facebook group, which is Fight for Zero Brevard. We also have one for Satellite Beach, the 32937 area, called Satellite Beach Health and Hope for Tomorrow. And it's really a group for the cancer patients, survivors, and their families to get information, to connect. I think we have built an amazing support system. All of us need one another when it comes to this crazy fight. And we also have on our website, we have been putting up as much of our research as we possibly can, and we've been adding to it as we go. We are a small grassroots organization. So, but this is the link if you guys want to go check it out. We try to summarize everything that happened in Satellite Beach. And then we also summarize the South Patrick Shores dump. So that is the link below. If you want to visit our website and learn more about the South Patrick Shores dump, you can go there and learn that. I want to talk about what we've accomplished. Like you guys earlier said, you know, we had designated captains, and you guys had helped us collect. We had collected hundreds of names, and it got so overwhelming we had to do it by decade. So what we would do was like from 2000 to 2010, you know, so you, Jennifer, would get that, and then Victoria, you would get from 2010 to current. And we started all the way back in the 70s, as far back as we possibly could, to get as much data as we could in that area. And actually, we've collected across the entire county and now the state of Florida. So we have all this data to compare to in our crowdsourced information, and we continue to get data. And sometimes that data that comes in is shocking. Like there's one street in South Patrick Shores that have 12 cases of breast cancer. And I know that we just learned that there were 10 additional breast cancer cases diagnosed just last week, right?
Yeah.
So that data, I feel, is very important. Like Jennifer earlier said, we have this heat map, and we are working on putting together an interactive state map, so that way this type of information is put up as a visual, and it helps. So when you guys submit your information, crowdsourcing that information really, really helps us drive change that is desperately needed for these communities that have been affected by Department of Defense contamination.
And I'd like to add to that the importance of why we decided to go further back, as we learned as we started this initiative, was that really the Florida Department of Health admitted that the numbers really didn't go back that far. Again, I can't help but to say how convenient, you know, but whether it was that's when their databases decided moving forward to collect data. But as we were able to go back and talk to, you know, and go on Facebook pages of alumni sites, people that, you know, grew up in Patrick Shores, all reaching out to each other and say, hey, did you hear about so-and-so? Oh, I lived on that street. Oh, did you hear about this? We were able to, in a grassroots effort, realize this was way bigger than we even could imagine or wrap our heads around, because what we learned through our investigation was it was really since World War II that we know now the environmental dumping, you know, really since 46 on is what, you know, accumulated in the environment over the time that then compromised the groundwater contamination that led to people wondering, hey, what's in the water?
So I know that, you know, we've been talking about bringing survivors to Washington, D.C., and with the pandemic, that's been put on hold for now, but I'm really hoping to get a group of cancer survivors there to have this conversation. We do all kinds of, workshops and summits up there. And I think it's really important that we take this to a national level. So I've been working with a national media outlet. So we're trying to get this story seen on a national level. And I also was just speaking with members of Congress this week. Yesterday, I spent 5 hours in meetings, and I just wanted to tell you guys, kind of what we went over. There's a big push that the Department of Defense start cleaning up their mess. One of the things that I brought forward is our communities feel like the Department of Defense is not being transparent in what is going on with the information, that they're not making the information easily accessible, and that we would like for them to make every testing result publicly available without us being forced to go through FOIA requests or really insane avenues to get any kind of information. That lack of transparency is never good on any level. With the Department of Defense, with the government, the lack of transparency loses even more trust with the community. And so that was something we really, really pushed on. Is that something you guys feel is a good evaluation of how the Department of Defense they've been silent? I told them in our communities, we have 3 active installations. We have NASA, Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, and Patrick Air Force Base. They have not communicated with the community. They never told us about this contamination. And they always say, well, we only talk about active installations, meaning they only talk about what's on base. So as a person that's a military family, right? I think, okay, if that's the direction you want to take, what about the service members and their families that are living on base then? Will you talk about that in their health? We know that contaminants do not just stay in one place. Water moves, contaminants move, and we have decades of pollution here. And I think a lot of people don't realize, it's not going to just stay in that one place, and they don't want to have that conversation. And so that is something I brought forward. There's a lack of transparency when we go, and I brought up the RAB meetings and how they're adversarial, and it's almost like they're working harder against the community and being open with them than they are giving them the information that they so desire.
Or it comes across as it's under the guise, see, we are actively doing something. And like I said, we've been going to them the last couple of years, and then they, touted their horn about this one example of something they knew back in 1991 that after 30 years was cleaned up. So imagine all those other examples that have yet to be dealt with, that we don't even begin and the public doesn't begin. I mean, if you start going to those meetings and you read some of the data, there's a lot of contamination that they haven't even begun to clean up or acknowledge is, on the books to be cleaned up this 2021 year. And that's concerning because while it sits there, it's seeping into the earth. It's, we talk about vapors. There's so much that impacts not only the environment, but that then in turn impacts human health, pet health. We see it in our animals. As Erin says, the animals will tell you first. As a matter of fact, Carrie, I could really relate to your story earlier at what you saw at the vet, because my dog actually came down with osteosarcoma. So, and we had it removed, and that's crazy.
And that's one of the main ones that the dogs are getting is osteosarcoma.
Yep.
And their bodies are smaller than us, and they drink the water, they drink whatever they can get to, in the, even in puddles and things like that. Their paws are constantly absorbing everything. Where we wear shoes, they don't have that. They're absorbing everything on the ground, and the contamination being in the ground, and even just being in the backyard. We've talked about the vaporization and how it can rise up, and I think that's a huge part of it, especially for the pets in the area, because they're just in it.
2 months after I was diagnosed with cancer, my dog had a massive tumor, brought her in, she had cancer, and she ended up passing too.
Our family dog the same year. It's insane. And it's so funny because people are like, oh, they have a misconception that, oh, it's genetic. It must run in your family. I'm like, neither side of my family ever had cancer until this happened. And my mom didn't birth my dog. You know? Like, and my uncle, who's not even blood related to us,
say
who's
something
married.
positive though.
Yeah.
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 You know,
I want to say something.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I was just wanting to.
Go, Jen.
I just want to say one of my goals that I would love to see is with this organization, and Stell, what you're doing as the executive director is very important. Is we know data collection is key. We're not going to be able to have evidence other than our stories if we can't get to the point where we can collect blood from people that would be willing to collect their blood to see what levels of PFAS or other type of contaminants are in their bloodstreams. I think that the crowdsourcing and diagnosis is important because that's data collecting, but all of that data paints a picture. So, again, this is going to be a grassroots effort. We're not in a sprint. This is a marathon. A lot of people still don't want to believe that this is really happening, or they dismiss it, or they say, well, why is it that I'm okay, or all these other people don't get it? Well, the reality is that all of our bodies are unique or different. And, when you think about it, military families travel, people move out of the area. So it's also very hard to pinpoint, when did something come to fruition? Because a lot of times when you have a little contamination of this or this in the body, it can take decades or years. Kind of like if someone decides to eat horribly in their childhood and their adulthood, they may not see the impact of that for 20 to 30 to 40 years. It's no different when you get a little bit of chemical contamination. But what you're finding is the reason why children's hospitals and things are increasing, and we're seeing more illnesses that we never saw in children, is because the environmental contamination is compounding now over the decades that we're not cleaning this up. And so we can all sit here in the land of denial, or we could say, hey, we all want to do our part to be a part of the change we want to see in our world. And that means, what are the things that we could do in our households and the way in our lifestyles, what we do every day to help ourselves prevent, the impact it's going to have on our bodies, but also what can we do to help protect the next generation, our children and our children's children. It's a legacy that we're dealing with here. Obviously, that's already proven itself with the 91 cluster moving forward, and more people are getting diagnosed younger and younger. This should be alarming to people.
Absolutely. Stell, didn't we have in the beginning people call the Department of Health
Yes.
for their cancers, and they didn't choose to use
So, we've been investigating the Department of Health and how they handle these cancer cluster investigations, and we've actually got an expert to write about the Department of Health and how they investigate. He's a biostatistician, and he was saying this doesn't seem right. But what they did is they had everybody call in. There were moments that we would call in to kind of check in on them because we were getting reports from people saying, well, they won't take it. They're discouraging me. They're saying that this is normal and this isn't, there's nothing wrong here. So we would call, we would pretend that we're another, we'd say, well, we want to report our case. And sure enough, they were discouraging people. They would say, well, this is normal. And I remember telling, the person that answered, I said, well, there's 12 cases of cancer on my street, because I was thinking of the South Patrick Short Street. And they go, and I said, and that's normal? And they said, yeah, that's normal. That's normal. And so they were trying to discourage people. Then finally we pushed and pushed. We had so many people pushing for people to call in that they were overwhelmed with calls, overwhelmed. And so they were collecting. I don't know what they did with that because they never used it. They just ended up using the cancer registry, and they still could not explain.
But didn't they send out a letter saying, upon massive research, we...
Yeah. Well, they still couldn't explain away, and they left out breast cancer, which we knew would have been the highest of all. They left out the breast cancer. And so that was interesting. So there's a lot of mistrust with the Department of Health when it comes to all of these communities that have been affected. I just feel like they investigate because they have to, because there's so many people pushing them to do it. I don't know what they do with this information. They have to report when you get diagnosed with cancer, you go into a system.
Yeah.
And I feel like, what's the point of that system?
Well, I'll be honest with you guys. What's really struck me over the last week, I've been thinking a lot about it. Look at how with this COVID vaccine release, they're able to track so quickly in the last year who's gotten the shot and who hasn't. So the tools are there. They've just chosen not to do it with this situation.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And that's unfortunate. And you mentioned blood testing earlier. And I do want to say that I'm pushing for the Department of Defense to cover that in their budget, that blood testing be covered for veterans, military families, and surrounding communities affected by this contamination. And I know that we talk a lot about PFAS because it's a forever chemical. So it doesn't break down in your body. This stuff is serious. If you guys don't know what it is, I'm going to put down, there's a documentary called, what is it? The Devil We Know.
And the Dark Waters.
Devil We Know and Dark Waters. So The Devil We Know. And then there's a movie based on a true story, and that's called Dark Waters. So if you guys have not seen those movies or documentary, watch it. You will learn a great deal from those two things alone. I want to play a quick clip that we created was kind of a look back at our journey really quick, and then I'll pop back on. We'll kind of give our final thoughts so we can get off here and everybody can enjoy their holiday weekend. So we'll go ahead and play that now.
This is a picture of my daughter, Hallie. She went to Special Highland, Delora, and Satellite Beach. Graduated 2010. She has a stage 4 glioblastoma. She has months to maybe years to live.
And there's power in numbers. And the more information we know, the more we can do things about it.
I mean, it's clearly corrosion on the outside.
There is no definable dump site. There is no.
We'll send somebody out to check it out for you, okay?
Not until we take the safety and health of our communities seriously. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, so I just, looking back at how far we've come, I am just so proud of you all. And I'm so grateful for your stories, your advocacy, and your voices, and for just continuing to push. Sometimes it's just as simple as talking about it. I mean, that's really what spearheaded this, if you think about it. It's when we started telling our stories, other people came forward and started telling their stories, and they felt comfort in that. And it's just so important that we continue to tell our stories and use our voices in this. When you see that, what do you see? Like, I see so much progress, and it doesn't seem like it to some people, but we have made a lot of progress, and we are going to continue making progress.
And I want to thank you, Stel, because I know it's not been easy. I know, there's been a lot of resistance, a lot of people that have questioned our motives, and the reality is we really believe in the power of having private conversations and educating people if they don't feel comfortable doing something like what we're doing tonight, coming forward on a video screen. I find, honestly, most people would like to have a private conversation out of fear of not knowing what would it mean to speak up or be known. Also with HIPAA, wanting to protect your personal medical information. A lot of people fear job searching, disclosing their medical information, as well as house selling with their, information about this area. And what we all know is that doesn't keep people away, because our housing market's thriving. And, that's the hope that I would like to share tonight. Again, Carrie mentioned it as well, is that we're all here, we're surviving and thriving, and we're advocates, because we do believe, for those of us that are here, that we have a responsibility to not only to ourselves, to figure out the things we can do in our survivorship to take care of ourselves, to protect ourselves, to prevent cancer coming back, or the things we're more at risk or predisposed to due to the chemo drugs or the treatment that we've had due to our diagnosis. But it's also important to give others hope. People that maybe haven't walked or can relate to our stories, but they're fearful because they're like, I don't want this to happen to my child. Or, oh my gosh, what do I do now that I'm aware that this is going on? Empower yourself. There are simple things that you can do in your lifestyle habits that don't require a lot, that don't require a lot of money, but you can do daily to really help protect your immune system and your health from, environmental contamination that's all around us every day.
As far as the house market too, one of the things I do remember Erin Brockovich saying when she was here, she said that the housing market doesn't plummet, it might plateau, but as soon as you do the right thing and do the cleanup, it will skyrocket. But she said that in every place that she's gone to. I remember that distinctly, because I remember at that point still there was a lot of issue about the housing market, and she says it will not plummet, it might plateau. But I mean, clearly we're doing just fine.
Yes, we are.
Absolutely. And it's never. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I see a lot of people posting, finding our Satellite Beach Health and Hope for Tomorrow group, and posting and asking questions like they've found it online, that there's a problem and what's going on. Should I move here? Should I not move here? And moving forward with the cleanup would make it even better for people to feel more comfortable moving to the area. That's another thing that would be a really positive step forward for the whole entire community,
Well, I remind people all the time, I choose to live here. No one's making me live here. I choose to live where I was born and raised. And I'm a 31-year survivor, and I'm not saying I'm dismissing those people that weren't able to win the battle, by no means. But again, I think we need to get over the fear or the denial. And, a lot of times people fear what they don't understand.
It's so true. And I just want to put it out there, like, we've always wanted to protect, those home values. We've always wanted to protect people, their lives, their health. And so we take into account all of those concerns. We've heard them over and over again, and we don't dismiss that fear that you have about your home values, or, what if people find out about, my diagnosis, and there's a lot of people that come to us and they're kind of like whistleblowers, and we keep their identity confidential. So we have been very careful in that, and helping other people that aren't comfortable being public about their situation. So I just want you all to know, I have people come to me all the time calling me, and they're like, I don't want to talk about this on social media, and they confide in us. And so what everyone is doing, you can make a difference. Everyone can make a difference. We can't do this alone. This took many people. It doesn't take one person. It took many people. We had people behind Facebook pages helping us. We had people within businesses within the community helping us. I mean, it was everywhere. It wasn't, just one particular group or one person. And so you can make a difference if you're watching this, you know, and we're going to continue moving forward, and we're going to continue trying to push for that cleanup and for the DOD to be accountable finally for everything. We can't change what happened to us in the past. Our diagnosis happened, it's over with. We can't go into the past. But what we can do is we can change the future. And that's why this is so important to us, because we want to be able to save our children from going through the same torment that we had to face with our illnesses and diseases or cancer. If we can prevent that for one person, we're doing exactly what we set out to do. And I think we're getting there. Like, Jennifer, how do you put it? It's not a marathon. What do you say?
It's not a sprint. It is a marathon.
It is a marathon. Okay.
I foresee that I will be a part of this till, you know, I'm 6 feet under, because the reality is these are forever chemicals, along with other environmental things that have been around that are continuing to cause environmental impact on people's health. You know, there's a lot of things we're getting more information, education in the media of things that we can empower ourselves to do. But to say it's other people's problems is really not socially responsible for any of us. I think we all should feel a responsibility when we talk about glyphosate and, you know, fertilizing our yards. You know, that would be an easy responsibility of a change people make, you know, right there. You know, plastic straws, metal, you know, straws, you know, sustainable living, you know, eating more nutritionally, growing your own food, knowing where your food sources are and how your food is grown. You know, what Carrie touched on, myself as a wellness educator, you know, all these things empower people to live less in fear and feel like they can arm themselves to protect themselves and their families and their legacy.
Well, I think we've been on here a long time. Like I said, we'll be revisiting this topic and much more in the near future, because there's a lot more that we can give insight into. And so I want to wish you guys an amazing weekend. Have a good holiday and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.